Karen calls 911 on a black man changing his Wi-Fi password, but what cops uncover shocks the neighborhood. Arthur Penhaligon, a retired software engineer, enjoyed the predictable rhythm of his quiet suburban life in Crestwood, Missouri. His days were filled with simple pleasures, and his high-speed internet was his primary link to the outside world. So when his connection began to crawl, Arthur's finely tuned instincts sensed that something was amiss. This wasn't just a technical glitch. An unknown device was lurking on his network. Little did he know, this digital intruder was about to unravel a horrifying neighborhood secret, and a paranoid neighbor was ready to point the finger in the wrong direction. Every morning, after his customary 2 cups of black coffee and a scan of the Wall Street Journal, he would settle into his comfortable armchair in his sunroom, overlooking his meticulously tended garden. From there, he'd connect to the world, checking email, reading online articles, occasionally video chatting with his daughter in California. He wasn't a Luddite, not by any means. He'd spent his career as a software engineer, after all, crafting the very digital infrastructure that now connected billions. But he appreciated simplicity, reliability, and above all, privacy. His home, a modest but well-maintained ranch in Crestwood, Missouri, was his sanctuary. It was a quiet neighborhood, the kind with tree-lined streets, well-kept lawns, and a sense of established order. The houses were mostly occupied by older couples, retirees like himself, or families with grown children. It wasn't exciting, but that was precisely why Arthur liked it. He'd had enough excitement during his career working on high-stakes projects for government agencies and Fortune 500 companies. Now he craved peace and quiet, the predictable rhythm of his days. His internet connection, therefore, was more than just a convenience. It was his lifeline, his connection to the outside world. He'd chosen the fastest plan available from his provider, boasting speeds of up to 1 gigabit per second. He needed it, not just for his leisure activities, but also for the occasional consulting work he still took on, mostly for former colleagues who valued his expertise. Lately, however, his connection had been anything but fast. Web pages loaded at a snail's pace, videos buffered endlessly, and even his emails seemed to take forever to download. At first, he blamed his internet service provider, assuming it was some sort of network congestion or equipment malfunction. He'd called their customer service line, endured the endless hold music and the robotic voice prompts, only to be told that everything looked fine on their end. But Arthur knew better. He'd spent his life troubleshooting complex systems, identifying glitches, and finding solutions. Something wasn't right. He decided to take matters into his own hands. He logged into his router's administrative interface, a familiar digital landscape of IP addresses, network settings, and security protocols. He wasn't just a user of technology. He understood it at a fundamental level. He started by checking the list of connected devices. His laptop, his smartphone, his smart TV, all accounted for. But then he saw it, an unfamiliar entry labeled simply, Guest PC. He frowned. He hadn't authorized any guest access. He lived alone, and he certainly hadn't had any visitors recently who would have needed to connect to his Wi-Fi. A cold knot of unease began to form in his stomach. This wasn't just a slow internet connection. This was a potential security breach. Someone was piggybacking on his Wi-Fi without his permission. He clicked on the device details, trying to glean more information. The MAC address, a unique identifier for network devices, didn't reveal anything obvious. It wasn't associated with any known manufacturer. The IP address was local, meaning the device was within range of his router. Someone nearby, a neighbor perhaps. He considered his neighbors. Most of them were older folks like himself, not exactly the type to be engaging in digital espionage. There were a few younger families, but he didn't know them well. He'd always kept to himself, preferring his own company to neighborhood gossip and social gatherings. It was a choice he'd made consciously, valuing his privacy and independence. But now, that very privacy seemed to be under threat. His gaze drifted towards the house next door, a 2-story colonial with neatly trimmed hedges and a perpetually overflowing flower garden. That was where Karen Whitmore lived. Karen was a character. She was a middle-aged woman, widowed a few years back, and she seemed to have made it her mission to be the unofficial guardian of neighborhood standards. She was the type who would report you to the HOA for having a blade of grass out of place, or for leaving your trash cans out for an extra hour. She was always peering out her windows, watching, judging. Arthur had always found her annoying, but harmless. Now he wondered if there was more to her than just nosiness. Could she be behind this? It seemed unlikely, but he couldn't rule it out. He saw her now, standing at her kitchen window, looking in his direction. She was holding a cordless phone to her ear, her expression intense. Arthur quickly looked away, feeling a sudden surge of anger and frustration. He didn't like being watched. He didn't like being suspected, and he certainly didn't like having his privacy invaded. He decided to take action. He went back to his router settings, selected the guest PC device, and clicked disconnect. Then, he changed his Wi-Fi password, choosing a long, complex string of characters that would be virtually impossible to crack. He leaned back in his chair, feeling a small measure of satisfaction. He'd taken back control of his network, at least for now, but the unease remained. Who was guest PC? And what were they doing on his Wi-Fi? He knew one thing for certain. He wouldn't rest until he found out. He decided to check signal strength. He grabbed his laptop and stepped outside. Arthur stepped out onto his front porch, laptop in hand. The late afternoon sun cast long shadows across his neatly mowed lawn, the air still thick with the Missouri's humidity. He wanted to check the Wi-Fi signal strength around his property, hoping to get a better sense of where the unauthorized guest PC might have been connecting from. He walked slowly towards the edge of his property line, closest to Karen Whitmore's house, his eyes fixed on the signal strength indicator on his laptop screen. As he reached the property line, he noticed Karen Whitmore standing on her front porch, her arms crossed, her gaze fixed on him. She had that look on her face, the one he'd come to recognize as her "I'm judging you" expression. He ignored her, focusing on his task. He wasn't doing anything wrong. He was simply protecting his own property. Suddenly, the wail of sirens pierced the quiet afternoon air. Arthur looked up, startled. He saw a police cruiser, lights flashing, pulling up in front of his house. Two officers emerged, a young, somewhat hesitant-looking man, Officer Hayes, and a more seasoned, observant woman, Officer Ramirez. Arthur's stomach dropped. What was going on? Karen Whitmore, a smug look on her face, pointed towards Arthur. "That's him," she exclaimed. "That's the one I told you about. He's been out here all afternoon, messing with his computer. I think he's hacking something." Officer Hayes approached Arthur cautiously, while Officer Ramirez kept a watchful eye on Karen. "Sir," Hayes said, his voice polite but firm, "we received a call about suspicious activity. Can you tell us what you're doing?" Arthur, still holding his laptop, felt a surge of indignation. "Suspicious activity?" he repeated, his voice rising slightly. "I'm checking my Wi-Fi signal. I'm a retired software engineer. I live here." He gestured towards his house, trying to maintain his composure. He knew how this looked. A lone, older man, standing on his property line with a laptop, being confronted by the police. It was a scene ripe for misinterpretation, especially to someone like Karen Whitmore. "Ma'am," Officer Ramirez said to Karen, her voice calm and professional, "can you please tell us exactly what you saw that made you concerned?" Karen, emboldened by the presence of the police, launched into a rambling explanation, filled with vague accusations and unsubstantiated claims. "He's always been strange," she said, her voice shrill. "Keeps to himself. Never comes to the neighborhood gatherings. And today, he's been out here for hours, hunched over that computer, doing who knows what. I think he's a hacker. Maybe he's trying to steal our identities or break into the bank's computers." Arthur couldn't believe what he was hearing. This was absurd. He was being accused of being a cybercriminal because he was checking his Wi-Fi signal? He opened his mouth to protest, but Officer Ramirez held up a hand. "Sir," she said to Arthur, her tone more respectful than Officer Hayes, "would you mind explaining to us what you were doing with your laptop?" Arthur took a deep breath, trying to regain his composure. "Certainly, officer," he said. "I noticed my internet connection was unusually slow. I logged into my router and discovered an unauthorized device connected to my Wi-Fi. I disconnected it and changed my password. I was just outside checking the signal strength to see if I could determine where the device might have been connecting from. He opened his laptop and showed the officers the router's administrative interface, pointing out the guest PC entry and the activity logs. Officer Hayes, still somewhat skeptical, peered at the screen, his brow furrowed. Officer Ramirez, however, seemed more receptive, her eyes scanning the information with a discerning gaze. "So, you're saying someone was using your Wi-Fi without your permission?" Ramirez asked. "Exactly," Arthur said. "And I have reason to believe they may have been doing more than just stealing bandwidth." Karen scoffed. "Oh, please," she said. "He's just trying to cover up what he's really doing. He's probably a Russian spy or something." Arthur ignored her, focusing on the officers. He knew that Karen's paranoia was clouding her judgment, and that any attempt to reason with her would be futile. Officer Ramirez, however, seemed to be growing increasingly skeptical of Karen's claims. She glanced at Officer Hayes, a subtle communication passing between them. "Sir, do you mind if we take a look inside your house?" Officer Hayes asked, the request still phrased as a question, but with a clear expectation of compliance. He was still, seemingly, giving more credit to the accuser than was wise. Arthur hesitated. He knew he had nothing to hide, but the idea of allowing the police to search his home based on the flimsy accusations of a nosy neighbor felt like a violation of his privacy. He'd spent his career protecting digital privacy, and now he was being forced to defend his own. He looked at Officer Ramirez, searching for some sign of understanding. He saw it, a flicker of empathy in her eyes. She seemed to recognize that this situation was not as straightforward as Karen Whitmore was making it out to be. "I understand your concern, officers," Arthur said, his voice steady. "And I want to cooperate fully. But I also know my rights. I'm not going to consent to a search without a warrant. However," he added, holding up his laptop, "I'm happy to show you anything you want to see on my router, right here, right now. I have nothing to hide." He knew this was a calculated risk. He was refusing a direct request from law enforcement, but he was also offering an alternative, a way to demonstrate his innocence without compromising his principles. He was betting on Officer Ramirez's professionalism and her ability to see through Karen Whitmore's unfounded accusations. He waited, his heart pounding, for their response. Officer Ramirez held Arthur's gaze for a moment, then nodded slowly. "That's fair, sir," she said. "Let's see what you've got." She turned to Officer Hayes, a subtle signal passing between them. Hayes, though still somewhat hesitant, seemed to defer to her judgment. Arthur let out a quiet sigh of relief. He hadn't won yet, but he'd gained a crucial foothold. He turned his laptop screen towards the officers, displaying the router's administrative interface. "As you can see," he explained, pointing to the guest PC entry, "this device was connected to my network without my authorization. I've disconnected it, but I've also saved the activity logs." He clicked on the logs, revealing a detailed record of the device's network activity. It wasn't just web browsing and email. There were repeated attempts to access specific IP addresses that Arthur recognized. "These," he said, pointing to the IP addresses, "are the addresses of my home security cameras." Officer Ramirez's eyes narrowed. "You're saying this device was trying to hack into your security cameras?" "Not just trying," Arthur corrected. "Succeeding. Look at the timestamps. These connections were active for hours at a time, multiple times a day, for the past several weeks." Officer Hayes, finally starting to grasp the seriousness of the situation, leaned closer, his skepticism fading. "Can you tell what kind of device it was?" Arthur shook his head. "Not definitively. The MAC address is masked, which suggests whoever was doing this knew what they were doing. But I can trace the IP address, and I can see the pattern of activity. And it's not just my cameras." He clicked on another tab, revealing a more extensive log, one he'd compiled by analyzing the data packets captured by his router. "This is where it gets disturbing," he said. "This guest PC wasn't just accessing my network. It was using my network as a jumping-off point to access other networks in the neighborhood." He pointed to a list of IP addresses, each one associated with a different home on his street. These are all local IP addresses. And these, he said, pointing to another column, are the ports that were being accessed. Port 80, port 443, those are commonly used for web traffic. But port 5 and 54, that's the default port for RTSP, real-time streaming protocol. That's used for security cameras. Officer Ramirez's expression turned grim. So someone's been using your Wi-Fi to hack into your neighbor's security cameras? That's exactly what I'm saying, Arthur confirmed. And I think I know how they're doing it. It's called a man-in-the-middle attack. They've set up a rogue Wi-Fi access point, probably with a name similar to one of the legitimate networks in the neighborhood. People unknowingly connect to it, thinking it's their own Wi-Fi, and the attacker intercepts their traffic, gaining access to their passwords and their devices. Officer Hayes whistled softly. That's pretty sophisticated. It is, Arthur agreed, and it's a serious breach of privacy. Whoever is doing this could be watching people in their homes, recording their conversations, even potentially controlling their smart home devices. Karen Whitmore, who had been standing silently on the periphery, suddenly gasped. "Oh my God," she said, her voice trembling. "My security cameras, are they?" Arthur looked at her, his expression softening slightly. Despite her earlier accusations, he couldn't help but feel a pang of sympathy for her. She was, after all, a victim in this too. "It's possible, Miss Whitmore," he said. "We need to find out who is behind this." Officer Ramirez turned to Arthur. "Can you trace the source of this rogue Wi-Fi signal?" Arthur nodded. "I can. I've already narrowed it down to a few houses. Using the signal strength and the timestamps of the connections, I can triangulate the approximate location." He pointed to a map of the neighborhood he'd pulled up on his laptop. "The strongest signal seems to be coming from somewhere in this area," he said, circling a cluster of houses a few blocks away. Officer Hayes looked at the map, then at Officer Ramirez. "The Millers live there," he said. "The ones with the teenage son, Ethan. He's supposed to be some kind of computer whiz." Officer Ramirez nodded, her eyes narrowed. "Let's pay them a visit." She turned to Arthur. "Mr. Penhaligon, we appreciate your cooperation. We'll need you to come with us to help us identify the device and secure the evidence." Arthur agreed readily. He wasn't just a victim anymore. He was a key player in uncovering this crime. He felt a surge of adrenaline, a sense of purpose he hadn't felt in years. He was putting his skills to use, not just to protect himself, but to protect his community. As they walked towards the police cruiser, Karen Whitmore approached Arthur, her face pale and contrite. "Mr. Penhaligon," she said, her voice trembling, "I owe you an apology. I was completely wrong about you. I jumped to conclusions, and I made things worse." Arthur looked at her, his expression unreadable. He was still angry about her false accusations, but he also saw the genuine remorse in her eyes. "Apology accepted, Miss Whitmore," he said, his voice firm but not unkind. "But I hope you've learned a lesson from this. Don't judge people based on appearances or assumptions. And please," he added, a hint of a smile playing on his lips, "get a stronger Wi-Fi password." He then turned and followed the officers to their car, leaving Karen Whitmore standing alone on the sidewalk, her face a mixture of shame and relief. The quiet afternoon in Crestwood, Missouri, had taken a decidedly unexpected turn. And it was all thanks to a slow internet connection and a retired software engineer who knew how to follow the digital breadcrumbs. The short drive to the Miller's house was tense. Officer Ramirez drove, her expression focused, while Officer Hayes sat in the passenger seat, occasionally glancing at Arthur in the rearview mirror. Arthur, despite the seriousness of the situation, felt a sense of grim satisfaction. He was about to expose a cybercriminal, and he was doing it with the help of the very police officers who, just minutes earlier, had been treating him as a suspect. They pulled up in front of a two-story house, indistinguishable from the others on the block, except for a slightly overgrown lawn and a basketball hoop hanging crookedly over the driveway. It was the picture of suburban normalcy, hiding a dark secret. Karen Whitmore, who had followed them in her own car, parked a short distance away, her face a mixture of anxiety and morbid curiosity. Officer Ramirez took the lead, approaching the front door with Arthur and Officer Hayes close behind. She rang the doorbell, and after a moment, the door was opened by a woman in her late 40s, with tired eyes and a worried expression. This was Mrs. Miller. "Mrs. Miller?" Officer Ramirez asked. "We're with the Crestwood Police Department. We need to speak with you and your husband about your son, Ethan." Mrs. Miller's face paled. "Ethan, what's this about? Is he in trouble?" "We'll explain everything inside, ma'am," Officer Ramirez said, her tone firm but polite. "Is your husband home?" Mrs. Miller nodded, her eyes darting nervously towards the street, where Karen Whitmore was still watching. She ushered them inside, her hands trembling slightly. The living room was neat but cluttered, with family photos on the walls and stacks of books and magazines on the coffee table. Mr. Miller, a tall, thin man with thinning hair and a perpetually furrowed brow, emerged from the kitchen, wiping his hands on a dish towel. He looked surprised and concerned. "What's going on, officers?" he asked. Officer Ramirez explained, briefly and to the point, that they had reason to believe Ethan was involved in illegal hacking activity, specifically accessing security cameras in the neighborhood without authorization. Mr. and Mrs. Miller were stunned. They exchanged bewildered glances, their faces a mixture of disbelief and denial. "Ethan?" Mrs. Miller said, her voice shaking. "That's impossible. He's a good kid. He's on the honor roll." "He's good with computers," Mr. Miller added, his voice defensive. "He's always on his computer, but he's not a criminal." "We understand this is difficult to hear," Officer Ramirez said, her tone softening slightly. "But we have evidence that links his computer to this activity. We need to speak with him." Mrs. Miller called for Ethan, her voice wavering. A few moments later, a lanky teenager with messy brown hair and a sullen expression appeared at the top of the stairs. He was wearing a black t-shirt with a cryptic computer code printed on it, and his eyes were red-rimmed, as if he hadn't slept in days. "Ethan," Officer Ramirez said, her voice firm but not accusatory, "we need you to come downstairs. We have some questions for you." Ethan hesitated, his gaze darting from the officers to his parents, then to Arthur, who was standing silently in the corner of the room. He seemed to recognize Arthur, a flicker of fear crossing his face. He slowly descended the stairs, his hands shoved deep into his pockets. "What's this about?" he mumbled, avoiding eye contact. "We believe you've been using your computer skills to access private Wi-Fi networks and security cameras in the neighborhood," Officer Ramirez said, laying out the accusation clearly. Ethan's initial reaction was denial. "I don't know what you're talking about," he said, his voice a mixture of defiance and nervousness. "I haven't done anything illegal." But Arthur stepped forward, holding up his laptop. "Ethan," he said, his voice calm but firm, "we have evidence. We know you've been using a rogue Wi-Fi access point to intercept network traffic. We know you've been accessing security cameras, including mine and Ms. Whitmore's." He showed Ethan the logs, the IP addresses, the timestamps. He explained the man-in-the-middle attack, the technical details laid bare. Ethan's facade began to crumble. He looked from the laptop screen to his parents, his face pale and stricken. I didn't mean to," he stammered. "It was just a challenge. I wanted to see if I could do it." "A challenge?" Officer Hayes said, his voice incredulous. "You violated people's privacy, Ethan. You spied on them in their own homes. That's not a challenge, that's a crime." Officer Ramirez takes over questioning Ethan. "It started with the Wi-Fi," Ethan mumbled, his voice barely audible. "I found a way to borrow bandwidth from other networks. It was just for fun at first, but then I discovered the security cameras. They were so easy to access. Most of them had default passwords or no passwords at all." He looked up at his parents, his eyes filled with shame and regret. "I didn't mean to hurt anyone," he said. I got carried away." Mrs. Miller let out a sob, covering her face with her hands. Mr. Miller stood frozen, his expression a mixture of shock and disappointment. "How many cameras did you access, Ethan?" Officer Ramirez asked, her voice gentle but firm. Ethan hesitated, then mumbled, "I don't know. A lot. More than 10. He nodded. "More than 20? He nodded again. The full scope of his actions was becoming clear. He hadn't just invaded the privacy of a few neighbors. He'd potentially compromise the security of dozens of homes, turning their own protective measures against them. Officer Ramirez sighed. "Ethan," she said, "you're under arrest for unauthorized access of a computer network, unlawful surveillance, and potentially other charges. You have the right to remain silent." She continued to read him his Miranda rights, but Ethan barely seemed to hear her. He was staring at the floor, his shoulders slumped, his dreams of becoming a computer programmer, of using his skills for good, shattered. He had crossed a line, and there was no going back. He was now facing the consequences of his actions. His mother was crying and reached out to him. The arrest of Ethan Miller sent shockwaves through the quiet streets of Crestwood. The seemingly ordinary teenager, the computer whiz, who fixed neighbors' printers and helped set up their smart TVs, was revealed to be a cybercriminal, a peeping Tom in the digital age. The news spread quickly, fueled by social media posts, neighborhood gossip, and the inevitable local news reports. The police secured Ethan's computer equipment, his laptop, his desktop, multiple hard drives, and a collection of sophisticated networking devices as evidence. The cybercrime unit began the painstaking process of analyzing the data, identifying the extent of his hacking activities, and determining if any other crimes had been committed. The investigation would take weeks, maybe months, and the full ramifications of Ethan's actions were still unknown. The residents of Crestwood, meanwhile, were left to grapple with a mixture of fear, anger, and betrayal. Many rushed to change their Wi-Fi passwords, update their security camera settings, and install firewalls. Neighborhood watch meetings, once sparsely attended, were now packed with concerned citizens, eager to learn how to protect themselves from future attacks. The sense of security, the illusion of privacy, had been shattered. Arthur Penhaligon, once viewed with suspicion by some, was now hailed as a hero. Neighbors stopped him on the street, thanking him for uncovering the threat, for preventing further harm. They apologized for their earlier doubts, for misjudging him. Even Karen Whitmore, her face still etched with shame, offered a heartfelt apology, admitting that her paranoia had blinded her to the real danger. "Mr. Penhaligon," she said, her voice choked with emotion, "I don't know what to say. I was so wrong about you. I accused you of being a criminal when all along you were the one protecting us. I'm so sorry." Arthur accepted her apology, his voice gentle but firm. "Miss Whitmore," he said, "I understand your concerns. We all want to feel safe in our homes, but fear and suspicion can be dangerous too. They can lead us to make false accusations, to target the wrong people. We need to be vigilant, yes, but we also need to be reasonable, and we need to trust our neighbors, not fear them." He offered to help her, and several other neighbors, secure their Wi-Fi networks and security cameras, providing them with step-by-step instructions and recommending strong passwords and encryption methods. He became the neighborhood's unofficial cybersecurity consultant, sharing his knowledge and expertise to help restore a sense of safety and control. He found a purpose in helping others. The Millers, meanwhile, were devastated. They had no idea about Ethan's activities, and they were struggling to cope with the shame and the legal consequences their son was facing. They hired a lawyer, vowing to support Ethan, but they also knew that he had to be held accountable for his actions. Their quiet suburban life had been turned upside down, their family torn apart by a secret that had been hidden in plain sight. As the days turned into weeks, Arthur found himself reflecting on the incident, on the strange twists and turns that had led to Ethan's exposure. He thought about the dangers of technology, the ease with which our privacy can be invaded, the vulnerability of our interconnected world. He thought about the importance of community vigilance, of looking out for one another, but also of avoiding the pitfalls of prejudice and snap judgments. He realized that the internet, for all its benefits, had also created new avenues for crime, new ways for people to harm each other, and he understood that even the most seemingly secure systems could be compromised if we weren't careful, if we didn't pay attention, if we didn't take responsibility for our own digital safety. He resumed the retirement project he'd let lapse. He was getting older, but not obsolete. The incident gave him a renewed feeling of value. One evening, as he was sitting in his sunroom, enjoying the peace and quiet of his now secure home network, he watched a video call from his daughter. She and his grandchildren waved. His granddaughter asked, "Grandpa, are the bad guys gone?" Arthur smiled. He looked out at the street, where the streetlights cast a warm glow on the neatly manicured lawns. The neighborhood seemed peaceful again, but he knew that vigilance was always necessary. "For now, sweetheart," he said, "for now." The digital world, like the real world, would always have its shadows, but as long as there were people willing to shine a light on those shadows, there was hope for a safer, more secure future. His router settings open on screen, he checked again for unauthorized connections. Everything was clear. He closed the laptop, content, for the moment, that the glitch had been fixed. In our increasingly connected world, it's wise to remember that technology, while a powerful tool, can also be a source of vulnerability. Just as we lock our doors at night, we must also secure our digital lives. The signal thief reminds us to be mindful of our surroundings, both physical and virtual. Don't let fear or prejudice cloud your judgment. Hasty accusations can harm innocent people. Instead, cultivate a discerning eye, paired with a willingness to help your neighbors. True security comes not from suspicion, but from community, understanding, and a commitment to looking out for one another, both online and off. If you enjoyed this video, don't forget to hit like and subscribe to the channel so you won't miss out on more exciting content. Every subscription is a huge motivation for me to create even better videos. Thank you for watching.